Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nira Tandon. I'm the president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and it's my great privilege to welcome all of you to this incredibly important discussion about the need for a full, thorough investigation into Russia's meddling in the 2016 presidential election. Russia's interference was perhaps the most underreported story during the entire 2016 campaign. And even when you talk about it now, it's really hard to almost grasp because it definitely sounds like it's something out of a movie. Not only did a foreign government work to sabotage our democratic process, but our new president actively encouraged them to do so. Though it pains me to say that, it is true. During a press conference in July, Donald Trump called on Russia to breach America's national security and spy on his opponent. And it happens that Russia followed through with those orders. These hacks have serious implications for our nation's security and more fundamentally for the sustainability and trust we have in our democracy. Our intelligence community has now confirmed that Russian hackers under the direct order of Vladimir Putin were trying to undermine our democratic process and tilt the election in favor of President Trump. And so these are vital issues and issues that we cannot play politics with. And yet, we have seen some incredible resistance on one side of Congress to these issues. So I'm really honored and thrilled to have Senator Dick Durbin here to discuss these critical issues. As a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Durbin has urged his colleagues across the aisle and in the new administration to just to be frank about it, put country ahead of party. And we're honored he could join us to discuss this critical issue and the role Congress and all of us need to play in it. So without further ado, please join me in providing a great warm welcome to senior U.S. Senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin.
Thank you, Nira, and thanks to the Center for American Progress. It's an honor to be back. This is an important forum in Washington and in our nation, and I'm happy I could share a few thoughts with you this afternoon. Last Friday, America achieved what so many nations have failed to do, peacefully transition to new leadership. It's a tradition in America that's more than 200 years old. That's worth celebrating. That's democracy. Without this foundational principle, you can't have a true democracy. The first peaceful transfer of power came after the election of 1800. Thomas Jefferson, a Democrat/Republican, defeated incumbent John Adams of the Federalist Party. Bitterly contested election. Both parties believed that the fundamental principles of America were at stake, and a victory by the other would ruin this new nation. When Thomas Jefferson won, he understood the far-reaching significance of what took place and said, quote, "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists." But what if a campaign is about something other than two opposing American political parties? What happens when we're presented with proof that the leader of a hostile foreign government, a former KGB secret police official, in fact, personally directed cyber attacks against our democracy and tried to influence the election to further his country's interest? Follow that with reports that, while unverified, underline the word unverified, were evidently credible enough for our own intelligence community to brief then President Obama and now President Trump that the Russian government possesses personally and financially compromising information about President Trump, and that there was continued contact between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. What happens when most of the Republicans in Congress dismiss even proven Russian interference with a boys will be boys shrug of the shoulders? What happens when we have a president who defies decades of bipartisan consensus and condones policies clearly sympathetic to Russian President Vladimir Putin? The answer is clear. We need a bipartisan, independent body to investigate this Russian cyber invasion of our body politic. I'm calling for a bipartisan independent commission to look into this attack with the shared end goal of preventing future attacks on our election and our democracy. The American people deserve the truth, and they need more than a secret hearing whose work, if it ever sees the light of day, will be so heavily redacted it could be worthless. The American people deserve to know the extent of Russian influence into the American election, what actions, if any, were taken by the Trump campaign, which members of this administration have been or could be compromised by a foreign adversary. Our intelligence community recently issued a damning and detailed assessment concluding that Russian strongman Vladimir Putin ordered an attack on our nation's electoral system to sow mistrust and favor one candidate over another. I have read the public and classified versions as well as attended classified briefings on the issue. I can tell you the evidence is sweeping, overwhelming, and deeply troubling. Here are some of the key public findings, and I quote, Russian efforts to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election represent the most recent expression of Moscow's long-standing desire to undermine the U.S.-led liberal democratic order. Further quote, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton, and harm her electability and potential presidency. Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. And I quote further, Putin and the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him. These conclusions are damning. Election Day 2016 is a day that will live in cyber infamy. A foreign adversary intentionally manipulated America's presidential election. It is an act of cyber war, and it cannot go unanswered. Amid warnings of Russian manipulation going back to early October, Donald Trump has not only resisted these findings, he praises Putin and dismisses the true nature of Putin and his threat. As early as July of last year, Trump urged a foreign adversary of the United States to conduct espionage against Hillary Clinton. He said, and I quote, I will tell you this, Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press. End of quote. And it gets worse. President Trump, who has impulsively attacked just about anyone who criticizes him, has not criticized the one person who's guilty of sponsoring this cyber attack. The president tweets at all hours about Representative John Lewis, Meryl Streep, Alec Baldwin, the American press, the American intelligence community, the cast of Hamilton, NATO, and anyone who would dare to slight him. But Vladimir Putin has been spared. Tweets for everyone except the one former KGB leader who ordered an attack on our nation, on our democracy. He hasn't been subjected to any tweet storm. Instead, President Trump is enthralled by Vladimir Putin. On December 30th, he tweeted about Putin, and he gushed, quote, I always knew he was very smart. At his January 11th press conference, President Trump said, quote, if Putin likes Donald Trump, I consider that an asset, not a liability. Most troubling is that instead of criticizing Putin after being presented evidence that he interfered in our election, President Trump attacked the integrity of the men and women of our intelligence community, comparing them to Nazi Germany. Then he attacked the press. Once again, he's attacking everyone except the perpetrator, a threat to the United States whose friendship seems oddly and dangerously important to the new president, especially in light of Putin's actions around the world. This is bigger than one election or one person. This is about our national security, and we should take it seriously. For those who've been following Putin over the years, this attack should come as no surprise. Russia has conducted cyber warfare against Ukraine, the Netherlands, Georgia, Lithuania, Estonia, and a host of other nations. Russia now appears focused on disrupting the upcoming German election over Putin's dislike of Chancellor Merkel. Russia's militarily seized sovereign territory in Georgia in 2008 and Ukraine in 2014, territory it continues to illegally occupy. Russian-backed separatists shot down a civilian airliner in 2014 from Donetsk, murdering 283, including 80 children, an act of barbarism for which Russia still has not been held to account. Instead of building a modern global economy based on the talents of the Russian people, Putin has created a false narrative that domestic Russian problems are the result of America and the West. He has tried to discredit democratic free market institutions and manufactured enemies of Russia to rally domestic support. It's a contrived story. When combined with domestic political repression and manipulation, it helps to keep Putin in power. And overarching in this scheme to maintain power is its determination to undermine Western democratic order that the United States and the Allies have worked to build since World War II. Sadly, President Trump has been proposing policies that help Putin, questioning the United States' role in NATO and NATO's relevance, undermining the European Union, lifting sanctions on Russia, and belittling key European leaders. And don't forget, President Trump's deeply troubling senior White House advisor Steve Bannon of so-called Breitbart News, which openly supports anti-immigrant and racist populist politicians in upcoming European elections, further playing into Putin's goal of destabilizing the West. Why would we lift sanctions on Russia after an attack on the United States? Instead, Congress should consider the bipartisan Russian sanctions bill I co-sponsored in the Senate. That should be a priority. And don't be fooled into fanciful folly that if we just ease off Russia, they'll team up with us to defeat ISIS. Russia has been a shameful bystander in the fight against ISIS. When Russia was asked to help fight ISIS, it sat on the sidelines. It did not join the 68-nation coalition effort led by the Obama administration to fight and destroy ISIS. President Trump must not naively trade away Western security alliances and allies for the catnip-like lure of helping fight ISIS. And he must not naively trade away sanctions on Russia. To protect against this, I'm supporting legislation introduced by Senators Schumer and Cardin this week to ensure it doesn't happen. Now, I have to give credit to those senators who've spoken out vociferously in defense of honest elections and made clear that no one should be allowed to interfere in American democracy. As Matt Irwin noted in a recent Louisville Courier-Journal article, when evidence emerged that some were trying to steal sensitive political information, Senator Mitch McConnell, during his re-election campaign several years ago, called the perpetrators' effort Nixonian and assured Americans that an investigation was underway. His top aide warned, and I quote, "This is Gestapo-style scare tactics, and we're not going to stand for it." Conservative leaders praised McConnell for standing up to the enemies of democracy at that time and standing for the integrity of our electoral process. It wasn't about politics, it was about right and wrong. These statements weren't made in 2016 or 2017 amid the damning evidence of Russian interference. This happened in 2013 when 3 activists visited an open house at Senator McConnell's election headquarters and discovered they could hear a private conversation among his staff. They recorded it and shared it with the media. Let me be clear, what happened in Kentucky was just wrong. Senator McConnell's outrage was justified, and he was right to demand justice. But where is his outrage now? Where is his demand for justice? Since October, when the first official reports came out on the Russian attacks on our election, how many of my Republican colleagues came to the Senate floor to talk about this Russian attack on our nation and our democratic process? Other than a few fleeting and generic remarks about Russian cyber capability buried in their statements, exactly none. That's right, 0. Compare that with the number of times they've come to the Senate floor to talk about repealing health care for millions of Americans. 34. Ponder that for a moment. Since formal evidence was presented in early October of a foreign adversary attacking our democratic system, members of the party of President Reagan have not spoken about this once on the Senate floor. Now imagine if the situation had been reversed. I can hear the howls of treason and impeachment. 20 years ago, brand new to the United States Senate, I was a member of the Government Affairs Committee. The first hearing we had was lengthy and very interesting. We had just concluded the Clinton-Gore presidential campaign, and allegations were made that the Chinese government, this was 20 years ago, the Chinese government was accused of trying to insert itself in the presidential campaign of the United States, specifically in support of Clinton-Gore. Fred Thompson, we all remember him well, was chairman of that committee. John Glenn, the ranking Democrat. Thompson was a well-known man. Since has passed away, but he was known as an outstanding lawyer and a famous actor. He was my chairman. We spent months in public hearings, months, investigating whether the Chinese tried to insert themselves in any way, shape, or form in the election of Clinton Gore. Public hearings, week after week. They found virtually no evidence other than a handful of, can you believe this, Buddhist nuns writing checks to the Clinton Gore campaign, which nobody ever really explained. But there was no evidence that the Chinese government was involved in this in any specific way. We spent months on that theory in open hearings and months later publishing formal majority and minority reports. We took it very seriously 20 years ago. But what about now? Here we are with virtual silence on the Republican side of the aisle when it comes to Russia's attack on the United States, and a president who seems to be parroting some of the attackers' key lines. It's time for my Republican colleagues to put country before party and our national security interest ahead of any one person or one president. I call on Congress to undertake an investigation. I think that an independent commission is in order. We should pick some person or persons to chair or co-chair who are above reproach and integrity. General Colin Powell comes to my mind, Sandra Day O'Connor, perfect co-chairs for this serious investigation. There's reason, incidentally, why the majority party wants to keep this investigation on the Hill in a committee where they can control it and where it will be conducted largely in secret. Early refusals by Chairman Burr over whether the Committee on Intelligence would look into the reports about the connections between Trump campaign and Russia only support this point. An independent commission, my preference, which is led by people of unquestioning integrity, can get to the bottom of it. So if we're going to have a comprehensive, credible investigation, we need the resources, time, and staff to make it happen. Let me also note, it's clear that we need to know that the next United States Attorney General will take this matter seriously as well and be independent of the White House. This means allowing career Justice Department prosecutors and the FBI to follow the facts and the law. I'm concerned about Attorney General nominee Senator Jeff Sessions when it comes to this assignment. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, I asked Senator Sessions questions for the record. 2 days ago, I received his written response, and Senator Sessions admitted that he has not even read the January 6th Intelligence Community Assessment on Russian involvement in the U.S. election, neither the classified nor the unclassified version. The unclassified version, incidentally, is just a few pages, if you don't count the annex. I read it in less than 15 minutes. You would think that Senator Sessions, seeking to be the top law enforcement official in the land, would take the time to read it. That doesn't give me a lot of confidence that Senator Sessions is giving this matter the attention it deserves. I asked Senator Sessions if he would recuse himself from any FBI or DOJ investigation into Russian efforts to influence the election. I also asked if he would commit not to shut down or impede such an investigation. He responded that he would not make any commitment about allowing investigations to continue if confirmed, and he said he was not aware of a basis to recuse himself. Department of Justice regulations call for recusals from investigations due to personal or political relationships. Senator Sessions was a prominent supporter of the president's campaign. He defended the president's position on Russia in numerous interviews. On August 15th, USA Today published an article entitled, "Senator Jeff Sessions Backs Donald Trump on Russian Policy," detailing how Sessions changed his hawkish position on Russia to align with then Mr. Trump's statements. Clearly, an investigation into the reported Russia-Trump allegations has the potential to significantly impact the interest of Senator Sessions' soon-to-be boss, if he's confirmed, and Senator Sessions' close political ally. Again, these answers by Senator Sessions do not give me confidence. In the end, the American people deserve the truth. The stakes are too high to ignore. Let me close. On New Year's Eve, Nixon biographer John Farrell wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. While researching his upcoming biography, he found notes left by Nixon's closest aide, H.R. Haldeman. The notes confirmed what many had suspected for half a century. In the fall of 1968, while Nixon was running for president against Vice President Hubert Humphrey, he deliberately worked toward undermining President Johnson's efforts to stop the bombing in North Vietnam and begin peace talks to end that war. The notes left behind by Haldeman show, quote, that Nixon directed his campaign efforts to scuttle the peace talks. On October 22, 1968, Nixon ordered Haldeman to monkey wrench the initiative, in his words. Throughout his life, Nixon continued to deny that he ever had interfered, and with good reason. His actions may have violated federal law, which prohibits private citizens from trying to defeat the measures of the United States. Johnson had always suspected Nixon had a hand in this, couldn't prove it. Now history has proven it. Today we face another electoral crisis. Former diplomat James Bruno summed it up, and I quote, "The United States has just endured a carefully planned, well-orchestrated assault against its democratic form of government in the form of a grand cyber theft of information and targeted release of that information," end of quote. As Bill Moyers recently wrote, we can't afford to wait 50 years for history to judge. We need the truth about Trump and Russia now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Durbin. Thank you for those incredibly cogent arguments. We're going to take questions from the audience. I just wanted to, as you're thinking through your questions, start up with one question, which was you referenced the stakes and the issues involved. I want to raise one set of issues, which is that President Trump is not known for consistency across every issue. But on the issues of Russia, do you make anything of the fact that whether it's policies on NATO, positions on Crimea, Syria, his attacks on Merkel, on almost every issue that affects Russia, he has come out on the side, which is the sort of position that Russia is articulating. Is that something that causes you additional worry about what this all means?
It's confounding. I mean, it violates the sweep of foreign policy history over the last, since World War II, where we have really, when you ask of the Pentagon, what are the hard target nations in the world that we should most be concerned about? It is a list of 4. It is Russia, it is China, North Korea, and Iran. And that list has changed a little from time to time, but it certainly hasn't changed when it came to Russia. Interesting, when each of these nominees, General Mattis, for example, would come before me for a private meeting, and I would just ask him point blank, is NATO obsolete? How do you view Putin? The answers were consistent with what I just described. A long-term commitment to watching the expansionist ambition of the Soviet Union, now Russia, and a concern about what they are doing in theaters around the world that are critical to America's national security and world stability. Donald Trump has raised questions about each of those premises during the course of his campaign. He's departed from what has been the sweep of American foreign policy history for decades. I can't understand it, and it's causing great worry. My mother was born in Lithuania. I was lucky to first see it in Soviet times and then to return when that fledgling nation fought its way into independence, and to go back many, many times ever since. They're scared to death in the Baltics. Poland is worried. They don't know what our commitment is going to be if they are threatened by Russia today. And statements made by President Trump during the campaign and since don't give them any solace at all.
Thank you. I'll take questions, and if you could just identify yourself, and a mic is coming to you.
Thank you, Nira. My name is Matthew Murray, and up until a couple of days ago, I was with the Obama administration. I was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at the Department of Commerce, and then worked at AID. Senator Durbin, insofar as you have identified 2 goals here, one is a thorough review and transparent vetting of this issue, and that it be bipartisan. Why do you think the argument that has been made by many, including yourself, that it is very much in the interests of the Republican Party to get this resolved, get this completely understood and behind them in order to sort of pursue their agenda going forward, is not meeting with more support?
when I look at the time and resources devoted to emails and Benghazi, that went on month after month and year after year, what is the difference? Well, there are a lot of differences you can argue when you compare the two issues. Certainly the loss of human life in Benghazi is something we never, ever take lightly. But in this circumstance, the only explanation is political. The belief that this could in some way discredit the Trump campaign or the Republican Party. It is the only answer that I can find. And again, let me salute two colleagues, McCain and Lindsey Graham, both of whom have been outspoken in saying that the Russians overstepped and we should get to the bottom of it. There is a chance that I serve on Judiciary, that Lindsey Graham on the Crime Subcommittee may be able to open this door a little wider so we can see more about it. But so far, there's been limited or no interest by the Foreign Affairs Committee, and as I mentioned earlier, a qualified interest by the Intelligence Committee, which would do most of its work behind closed doors.
Back there? No. And I'll come up here.
Senator Richard Goodstein. Getting Paul Manafort and Roger Stone and Carter Page under oath publicly, I would assume, would be something you'd like to see happen. And assuming that your colleagues across the aisle won't let it happen, do you know whether there's any thought being given to private causes of action? Because there's certainly plenty of people that were injured, present company included, by what the Russians did, or whether even states' attorneys general, because the fact is there were implications in state ballot boxes. Is any thought being given to that, assuming you end up coming up a little short in terms of what Congress might do?
Illinois was one of those victims. It was back in the summer that our voter files were compromised, though we couldn't find any evidence of misuse of that information. I want to quickly add that despite all the findings by the intelligence agencies, they produced no evidence of actual Russian impact on the casting or counting of ballots. It's important that we be very straightforward about that. Having said that, it may not have been for lack of effort, and we know that our voter file in Illinois was at least hacked by the Russians at one point. So the question is, who has standing and who has the resources to pursue this, from some civil viewpoint or through some statutory means that I'm not aware of. Whatever it is, it's going to be far less in capacity than what we could do with an independent commission to get to the bottom of it. I think this is of sufficient gravity to merit it. If we fall short of it, I will support any reasonable legal effort to pursue it, but I still think we need to focus on this commission.
Right here? Yeah, he's coming with a mic.
Hi, Senator. I'm Tim Johnson with McClatchy Newspapers. What is the future of Russian hacking? Do you think that hackers, since last Friday, have diminished their activities, or what do you think is what they're going to do now?
I don't know what the Russian hacking strategy is, but I would have to say that there's nothing holding them back at this point. If they could do this in our country during this presidential campaign with impunity, and even with obvious approval at some levels, what's stopping them? I mean, if their next goal might not be an election, it could be something even more serious in terms of national security. From my point of view, this cyber war continues to the day, and now with the new commander-in-chief, what will he do to defend us? What will he do in retaliation? What will be done in covert activity and in open activity that we can count on to discourage them? There are no answers. And as I mentioned frequently in this speech here, his statements show a sympathy toward the perpetrator here, which is impossible to explain.
I would just say, obviously, there's activity in Germany that we should all be anxious about. They have upcoming elections, and we already have seen public reports of efforts by Russia. Right here?
My name is Ray McGovern. I spent 30 years in U.S. intelligence, 27 in the CIA. I was chief of the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch, and I briefed the President's Daily Brief to Reagan's first term.
You should be giving a speech.
I'll try not to give a speech. I have to say that I admired you so much for voting against the war on Iraq. You were one of only six to 94, okay? Because you saw that the intelligence was bogus. It was not mistaken, folks. It was fraud, okay? Now, if you exercise the same care in this instance and looked into the evidence that is adduced to say that Mr. Putin hacked into our election and gave that information to WikiLeaks, which after all was the one that published it, you will find that you disagree with the President of the United States former. Because on the 18th of January, he said, the conclusive evidence that the intelligence community gave me was inconclusive. Inconclusive with respect to the missing link. And that missing link, of course, is how or if or when the Russians, so-called, gave it to WikiLeaks. So I want to just say that there's an air of unreality here. All of you probably read the New York Times. Don't be deceived. That's what happened before Iraq.
The point I want to make is I don't know what the facts will show. But shouldn't we? Shouldn't we ask the questions? Shouldn't we have a record of people testifying as to what did occur, one way or the other? Let the chips fall where they may. But to say that we're not going to have a thorough investigation of this matter, wherever it leads. No, 14 intelligence agencies came to the conclusion before I did.
Yeah. All right, over here. Yeah, right there. Right there. Right here.
Mr. Senator, my name is Vladislav Inozemtsev. I'm a Russian, now at Johns Hopkins University. I want just to follow our gentleman from CIA and ask you one simple question. Even there is some proof of this Russian misuse, I'm a staunch opposer to Mr. Putin, but don't you think that talking about this for months, that the Russian intelligence operation can disrupt the elections in the most powerful country in the world, you are just inflating Mr. Putin's image in the eyes of the whole world. For seeing from Russia, you are doing a very pro-Putinist work because everybody in Europe, in Russia, everywhere believes Mr. Putin is the most influential man in the world after this. And everything what is spoken about elections in Germany, in France, it proves that. Mr. Putin gives 6 million euros to Madame Le Pen, and everyone is, okay with this. She will run for the president of France. In Russia, no one can run for the president of the Russian Federation if he receives $5,000. So
Great.
you are really making Mr. Putin a very influential guy, no?
No, I'm sorry, but I take the different point of view. These are serious allegations. To ignore them for fear that it will inflate the ego or the reputation of Vladimir Putin would be a serious mistake. We need to get to the bottom of this, and we need to know what he did. And in determining this, as we come to the facts and conclusions, I hope it will help other countries defend themselves and pinpoint specific efforts by Russia, if there are some in the future, to undermine their electoral process as well. No, I don't think silence is the way you deal with Vladimir Putin. I think you have to, in a democratic society, speak out publicly with the facts as you find them.
Okay, I think we have time for just one or two more questions right there. Middle.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Berry. I'm retired from the intelligence community also. So I have two questions. I had sort of a unique career in that I did evaluations and process analysis assessments across the intelligence community. So my first question is, how would you protect employees given the atmosphere we're in now, where retribution would probably be on the back of the minds of most people? And number two, have you ever thought about separating process and avoiding it in the future from the impact that they could have had by asking for a law to require the president to give his taxes to Congress to say we need to assess whether or not there is any potential area in foreign investment to use to blackmail him? Seems like those are two different issues to me, but just wondering
I
what you
hope they're
think.
two different issues, but we don't know. And I have supporting legislation for disclosure of presidential tax returns by candidates as well as sitting presidents. I think we should. We've reached the point now where we have diminished the whole conversation on ethics, because at the highest levels of the land, we have our commander-in-chief who is not making disclosures, which many members of Congress routinely make, for example. So yes, I think that should be part of it. Now, when it comes to the sources of information, our first obligation, obviously, is to protect sources and methods, particularly when they would compromise the safety of any person who has tried to help the United States gather information to keep us safe. And I would assume any independent commission would have some aspect of their work that would be classified. That's understandable, and I accept that. But I do believe there are a lot of things that can be publicized so that people understand what did happen and what the activity was. And in terms of retribution against those working at the agency, it's a legitimate concern based on some of the things that have been said. But I have to say, I would trust the men and women there who've taken an oath to defend this nation, to stand up and tell the truth. And some of them may do it at their own peril, their own professional peril.
Is there, just to follow up on that, is there anything the Congress can do to protect those people who are
We have some pretty
concerned?
serious whistleblower language in the law, but I would look at it specifically as it relates to this.
Okay, and unfortunately, I think we're running out of time. Last question right there. Maybe we can do two quick ones.
Senator Jonathan Lande with Reuters. I'm wondering, in all the briefings that you've had, has there been any, have you received any, has the IC been able to substantiate, are you able to say whether the IC has even looked at any aspects of the so-called Steele dossier that was released a couple of weeks ago?
I only know what we were told, and that was this unverified, underline the word unverified dossier was shared with President Obama and President-elect Trump because of the gravity of the information contained. The truthfulness and accuracy of it, I can't attest to that at all.
One last question right there.
Thank you for doing this, Senator. Joe Marks with Atlantic Media's NextGov. First, on the intelligence report that you mentioned earlier, the later report that came out from the three agencies included a lot more details but no more evidence than the original October statement. Given the concern about this and the doubt about it out there, is it time for more evidence to be promoted to sort of prove this to the American people first? And then second, you used the term cyber war a couple of different times, which I assume you used very purposefully. What makes this cross the barrier of cyber war, and if it does, what response is required and is sanctioned sufficient?
Let me just say that I hope more is disclosed, but that's in the hands of people who have to make this judgment on sources and methods and whether or not it would compromise some trusted people who are trying to help the United States. I leave that to them, and there's no way I can second-guess them or would try to. Secondly, in terms of where this leaves us, I think constantly in this cyber war, as in, what's the alternative, hot wars? I'm not sure. In the wars as we know them, kinetic wars, there's always a testing of the enemy. Where is our weakness on a certain front where we can move forward? And I think that's what Vladimir Putin and the Russians are doing. They are testing how far they can go into the body politic of the United States of America with impunity. And that's why we need to make a stand on this. I think they've gone too far, and they should be held accountable for it. Shame on the United States if we think so little of our democracy and our electoral process that we would see this interference and not respond with at least an investigation. I thank President Obama, who in his own way and several different levels responded to this with at least a show of disapproval of what they had done. I think more needs to be done. Thanks, everybody. Thanks
Thank
to
you
Cap.
so much. Thank you. Thank you.